And thank you for joining us with our annual wreath making workshop for children. We have to do it a little bit different this year, so we look forward to having you come and pick up our kits, and we're going to adapt so that we can still have a beautiful holiday wreath to make at home. What we're going to do is I'm going to start with a brief few slides I'm going to show you. We're going to talk a little bit about the processes, how to do it, and I'm going to show you some pictures and walk through the steps. And then I'm actually going to build a wreath here, and hopefully it will be easy for you to make your own wreath at home. This is the UBC Botanical Garden, one of my favorite photos. It's an aerial view, which I think is beautiful. It shows the ocean influence, and we can see here the food garden and our physic garden and our part of our alpine garden. And so before we get started today, I want to do a land acknowledgement. This is really important to the work that we do at the UBC Botanical Garden. And so very grateful that the garden grows on the traditional and unceded territories of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. The land that the garden grows on has always been a place of learning for the Musqueam people, who have for millennia passed on their culture, history, and traditions from one generation to the next. I'm incredibly grateful to get to work on these lands and to share teachings and lessons about plants. Plants are one of my favorite topics to talk about, and so today we're going to talk about plants that we can use to make a beautiful holiday wreath. So we want a little bit of wreath-spiration. This is our big goal, that we come away today with a holiday wreath that we can put a candle in, maybe on our table. You can put it on a door outside. You could put it in many different places where you want a little bit of holiday cheer. These are some examples of wreaths made by our wonderful friends of the garden, who make wreaths every year and sell wreaths from the shop in the garden. So beautiful different bows and birds. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you can augment your wreaths to make them fit your personal style. So I wanted to showcase, we're going to talk about the wreaths in four main parts. What we have here, and this is a wreath that I took a photo of yesterday that was available in the shop. And so the first thing that I would say I noticed are those beautiful berries, these purple berries, and we call these on the wreath our highlights. So you can have highlights that are berry plants, a big bow, you can use cones that you can paint and put sparkles on if you like, or you could also put on some holiday decorations. The second part is the evergreen base layer. So that's going to be what we're really going to build today. That's really important to think about. We're going to go a little bit more into those plants that we're using. You don't really see it in this wreath, but holding all of the evergreen base layers is at the base is moss. And this is a really important part of our living wreaths, because the moss is going to keep our plant material green and living for as long as we can. Just think of it as if you go and collect flowers, you want to put your flowers in a vase with some water. The moss is providing that same function today for our evergreen base. And you can't see it, but at the base is the wire frame. And the wire frame will be included in your kit. And the wire frame you can use year after year. So when it comes January, you can take off the plant material and save your wreath frame for next year. So let's start about our holiday highlights. So we have here my favorite, I'm wearing it in my hair today. This is skimmia. And this is a beautiful berry that we have that's available now. The interesting thing is that not all plants that you see with berries right now will be suitable for a wreath. Sometimes the berries fall off. So skimmia is a good choice. As I mentioned, you could use cones. These were some lovely cones placed on this wreath to really create a nice look. And of course, you can have big bows or decorations. In the past, when we've done this workshop with kids, it is amazing. It's up to you guys to decide what's your favorite decoration and what you want your wreath to look like. Ultimately, it's up to you. We're going to provide a few decorations in the kits. You don't have to use those ones. You can also use other ones that you might have at home. So the evergreens is the base layer of our plants. And today I'm working with 3 different types of evergreens. We're hoping that you're also going to have similar evergreens, but depending on the availability of plant material, they might be slightly different. But today we're working with 3 different types. One is the Western red cedar. This is my all-time favorite tree. It is a native tree to British Columbia. The leaves are scale-like is how we define them in botanical terms. And this is a large cedar trees. You can see them all over the city. You can go for a walk, you can come to the garden. They're everywhere and they're absolutely beautiful. Cryptomeria has awe-like leaves, and this is a big fluffy plant. It's going to add a lot of fluff to our wreath to make it nice and fluffy for us. And finally, we're going to also be working today with Serbian spruce. This tree is really interesting actually because it is native to the Eastern Mediterranean, and it grows in a very small range at the tops of mountains. However, it's been used horticulturally and is widely used, so you'll see it in very many places around the city. I wanted to highlight and show our cedar education pod. This is located just outside of our BC rainforest pod in the garden. And what we have here is we can see on the bench that we have the Hunkaminum name for cedar, we have the English name, and we have the Latin name. Plants traditionally have a Latin name that allow us to understand what genus and species the plants are in, and you can also see again here the scale-like leaves of the cedar. The spruce is a neat tree to look at. You can see some underlines here. I wanted to highlight these 2 waxy stripes that you see underneath the needles of a spruce needle. They actually are an adaptation from the plant to protect the plant from losing water, which I think is really neat. And for any of these plants, if you want to find them and see what they look like in the garden, you can go to our website and explore Garden Explorer, type in the name of the plant, and it will show you on the map where it is. This plant, this tree is located in our alpine garden, and you can learn other cool facts about the tree. So moss, as I mentioned, is an important piece of the wreath. It keeps our evergreen material very moist. The reason why we use moss is that because it's adapted, it is a non-vascular plant, so it means it doesn't have big long veins that can move water very far. So parts of the moss are adapted to hold water through their leaves. So it's a very efficient, it's essentially like a sponge. What we're going to do when you undo and get your kit, and when you're ready to build your wreath, you want to let your moss soak for a few minutes in water so it's nice and wet. And so that's just best practice for the moss. And the next is our wire frame. So in your kit, you'll receive a wire frame wrapped in a green plastic, and they should be your floral waxy twine. And this is, again, I mentioned you can save this again for next year. And this is basically how we're going to build the wreath, and this will hold our frame in place. So just as a quick review, your kit should include the following. You should have the wire frame, the waxy floral twine, your evergreen plant material. You're gonna have a bag of moss that you'll place in a bowl. You're gonna have some highlight materials, so skimmia, a bow, and a few other decorations. And so now I think it's time for us to create. So I'm gonna stop sharing this screen, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you down on my table here our setup. So what you see here is our first step is we're going to make a bouquet. So all of the base of the wreaths are mini bouquets. We're going to probably make about 12 to 14 bouquets in total. But first I wanted to show you how to make a bouquet. So the material that you get might be a bit longer. You might have longer sprigs. This is some of the Western red cedar. And so when you get it, what you want to do is to take your material, and if you're not making your wreath right away, I would put your plant material in some water so it stays fresh. I brought this back from the garden last week, so I've had them sitting in water because I wanted my plant material to be very fresh. But if your material comes, it will likely come a little bit bigger. I'm using pruners, which we call secateurs. You could also use scissors if you wanted to, but you're going to create about the size of your hand. So this one is incredibly long. I think it's actually a little bit too long, so I'm going to cut it. And that's going to be the base. And now we're going to make a mini bouquet. So I'm going to layer a few different types of plants here because I want my wreath to be colorful and full. So I have a few layers of cedar. I have a lovely yellow variegated cedar that's going to just give me a little bit of flashy color. I'm going to layer on my cryptomeria, which again, very fluffy. I'm going to put spruce on top. And then my berry plant is an accent. Not every one of my bouquets is going to necessarily have the berry plants. Generally, we don't have as much berry plants, and these are a bit of our highlights, but this one I wanted to show you. So I have a small wreath, a small bouquet here that I've made, and now this is where the moss comes in. So I have my moss sitting in a bucket here in a bowl with some water, and I'm going to wrap the base of my bouquet in the moss, and I'm going to let it drain a little bit, squeeze it out. I skipped over, I'm sorry, the part to show you about your setup. So the setup is important. I had pulled back a carpet that was underneath me just because it's going to get a little bit messy, and the moss does create some water. So when you think about your workspace, you just want to have a space where it's okay for needles to drop. But this is my first bouquet. So now what I'm going to do, now that I've shown you my first bouquet, I'm going to leave it here, just dry my hands. And for the purposes of today, I pre-cut all my bouquets so that we could show you the system that we have. So I'm just going to show you all the little bouquets that I have pre-cut ahead of time. So those are the bouquets that we have ready to go. I'm now going to bring in my frame. So when you receive your frame, we're going to tie on the string. There's going to be a long piece that you can use to adhere on your door, or if you want to hang it. But really important, your string, we're not going to cut the string until the very end. And I say that because we don't want to cut it, but it can be sometimes a little bit tricky. So I'm going to keep it somewhat rolled up. And so here I have my setup. Let me just get myself organized so you can see. I have my bouquet is ready to go. I just want to talk a little bit about the wire frame. So under here is the wire frame. The green plastic allows us to create a little bit of a belly where the moss can sit in. So what I sometimes like to do is to take a little bit of moss. I try to wring it out, and I'm going to lay it down because we're going to basically use our bouquets to build our wreath. But I'm going to start with laying down a little bit of moss. I have my bouquet where all of my material has been wrapped in the moss around the ends of the plant so that the plant can get moisture. And I lay my bouquet on the wreath. So the string, I'm going to do 2 tight wraps. 1, and I pull it through, 2, and actually I'm going to do 3 on this one. 3. And then I leave my string. So that there is my first bouquet adhered to my wreath. So now what I want to do is build out and take my other bouquets and continue to build my wreath. So again, I'm going to take my small bouquet, and I like to follow a similar pattern. You don't have to, you can do it however you want, but I had cedar on the bottom, a little bit of my yellow cedar for a little bit of that color, cryptomeria, and spruce. Here's my bouquet. I'm going to wrap it in moss. I'm going to drain the moss just a little bit. And now I'm going to place it on, and when you build your wreath, you can create your bouquets and you can point them inside and outside so that you start to get a nice full wreath. So this one, again, I'm laying it down and I'm going to do 2 or 3 tight turns to keep it in place. And again, you want to pull this quite tight. At the end and at any point, you want to be able to almost flip your wreath over. You can see how the back is looking, but you want it to be tight in there so that the material, you don't lose the material. So now I've had 2 bouquets on there. I'm going to grab another one of my bouquets, a little bit of moss. And lay it down in the belly of the frame. 2 tight wraps, maybe 3. And as we go, I'm not going to mess too much around with the material right now. That will come a little bit later. You can make the berries shine out and make them a little bit more visible. As you go through, some people like a consistent base layer and it to look the same. Other people like it to look different. So ultimately, this is for you to decide what style you like in a wreath. I have my bouquet. I'm going to wrap it. And we wrap again. I'm kind of near the end now. So my last bouquet, I'm going to add just a little bit of extra green material because I had a little bit left over. I'm going to flip this one and try to, actually, I think it might depend on how much room you have left. So I'm going to put mine this way. So the tying off, the final bit can be a little bit tricky. I just going to wrap this in really tight. So I'm not going to cut it yet because I'm going to show you what we kind of have going on here. So I'm going to do one more wrap of the moss. So what you can see is we have our wreath, and I'm going to turn it over because you really should be able to turn your wreath right over. I'm holding on to the string because I haven't tied it off yet, but I am going to tie it off, and I'll show you how I do that. I have my final long string here, and I'm just going to wind this and cut. I do have some scissors here. So now at the end, I'm finally cutting my string. And I'm going to tie it off with the starting string, the long piece that we left hanging. And I like to do the knot, which is right over left and under and left over right and under. My favorite knot to keep things nice and tight. So what you end up with, this is a very bushy wreath. But now we have a wreath, and look, it's got a fun kind of style. It's a bit bushy off to the side here. If you are looking at your wreath, so now I have my evergreen base layer. I have a few highlights, which are my berries. If you decide that there's some material in your wreath that you want, you're like, oh, it's too big, I don't like it, never pull it out. Only you can cut it out if you didn't want it there. I like this because it's big and fluffy. The other thing that I would think about adding to this is a nice bow. So as I mentioned, doing pretty bows is not my style and not my expertise. You can go to YouTube and learn how to make beautiful bows. But what I could do is, I think I'm gonna likely use this on my kitchen table, but I could put a bow on the side right here to give it a little bit of extra dazzle. The other thing, if I'm going to put it on a table, I would suggest that you put it on a plate, because it is a bit wet. And so now I want to talk a little bit about wreath care. So I'm going to switch the camera angle now and have us look up here and talk a little bit about wreath care. So there's my wreath. It's got some wild sides to it. I could choose to trim that. I kind of like it a little bit wild or not. If you want to adhere it to a door, you could use the string at the back and turn it and make it into a hook. Your parents might want to help you with that. In terms of caring for our wreath, so we've spent a lot of time to make sure that the green material is moist and wet. What you can do is about once a week, you either can take your whole wreath and put it in the sink, in your kitchen sink, and give it a water so that the moss that's in there can get wet again. The other trick that people like to use is a spray bottle, so you can keep it moist that way. I like to put mine in the sink. I give it a good wetting, and then I just let it sit in there and dry off for a little while before I bring it back out. So there you go. You have your moss, you have your wreath, and you're all ready to go. We hope this was a good session and clear. And and lastly, I was just going to highlight that while the material, you might not use all the plant material, I wanted to show you a little art project that my daughter made, and you can use the materials to make other little Christmas decorations or little Christmas displays. In previous years, we've also used the plant material and included it on Christmas cards and holiday cards. So there's lots of things that you can do with that plant material. And at the end of the day, when you're all finished with your wreath, you will cut the string. You can take the material and put it in your compost bin and keep your frame again for next year. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for coming. The video, you can stop and start it as you go. We're going to be hosting a Zoom session. If you want to drop in, we'll send you that information if you have questions, if you're stuck. And we hope you have a wonderful holiday season and that you enjoy making your wreath.